Have you been to the airport lately? There's trouble and turmoil for travelers everywhere. I'm Shepard Smith. This is the news on CNBC. Travel demand skyrocketing, along with flight delays, cancellations, and passengers behaving badly.
Yeah, that's a good.
Now, with ticket prices rising, are the airlines on the verge of a bailout backlash from taxpayers? The White House admits we won't hit President Biden's July 4th vaccination goal.
It'll take a few extra weeks to get to 70%.
But have we made enough progress to avoid a fall surge? Law enforcement's nationwide crisis.
Morale, I think, is at an all-time low now.
Retirements spiking. Resignations growing. Why America's police officers are fleeing the force. Primary day in the New York City mayor's race. All eyes turn to the city's new ranked choice voting. Steve Kornacki at the big board to explain it. Racist taunts at a high school basketball game. Democrats target big tech. And why NASA just sent dozens of baby squid into space.
Live from CNBC. The facts, the truth, the news with Shepard Smith.
Good evening. There's trouble in the air. Travelers hitting flight attendants, throwing empty alcohol bottles, and refusing to wear masks. The number of unruly passengers taken to the skies is surging now. The FAA just released its latest data and proposes more than $500,000 in fines against dozens of people. Millions of Americans are hopping on planes again for their summer travel, nearing peak pandemic levels. More than 2 million people crossed TSA checkpoints just yesterday. That's more than triple the travelers on the same day last year. But airlines are having their own problems, canceling some flights, delaying some others. Over the weekend, American Airlines alone canceled 400 flights and projected it'll have to cancel at least 50 flights every day until the middle of next month. The company blames weather, of course, but also worker shortages and maintenance. It seems they can't get their own people back to work fast enough for demand. And as flyers return, prices are rising. The latest government data shows airfares jumped 10% in April and another 7% in May. But international travel is still slow, and the airports that rely on those travelers are still hurting. The federal government's proposing to inject billions of dollars in grants into the nation's airports to help them recover. In a moment, we'll hear from Squawk Box co-anchor Andrew Ross Sorkin on the airlines and bailout backlash. First to Chicago O'Hare, where CNBC's Phil LeBeau is standing by. Phil, the FAA's warning, particularly about the rise of physical assaults.
Shep, the new numbers from the FAA, they are stunning, and it shows that the problem of unruly passengers is getting worse. More than 3,100 cases reported to the FAA by airlines. 75% of the time, it's because somebody refuses to wear a mask. But here's the stunning figure. 60-plus cases where people were physically assaulting a member of the flight crew, pushing, punching, all manner of physical altercations, and that has the people at the FAA as well as at the airlines worried that this problem is getting worse and they have to become more public about fighting it.
And they're putting more who fight on planes on no-fly lists, right?
Not necessarily. That's the interesting thing. The no-fly list is controlled by the FBI. And the key is that if you're put on the FBI's no-fly list, if you're considered a terrorist threat. Well, if you're not wearing your mask and you've had a little something to drink and you mouth off and you push a flight attendant, are you a terrorist risk? Probably not. Should you be flying? The airlines don't think so. Now, they may ban the person from a particular airline. They can turn around and fly somebody else, which raises the question, Shep, should there be some type of a no-fly list run by the TSA strictly for these people who cannot behave properly?
I mean, it makes sense. You know, then there's the airports, Phil. They're getting like $8 billion from the federal government, from taxpayers. How much will that help these vendors and restaurants and all the rest?
Oh, it'll help, because this money was earmarked back in March, and of the $8 billion, the bulk of it goes to the larger airports, which have more passengers going through. So we're talking about New York, Chicago O'Hare, LAX, Atlanta Hartsfield, Denver, and Dallas. Those are the airports that are getting the biggest chunk of the $8 billion in grant. But every airport will receive some money, and some of that money will go towards hiring more people, as well as helping out the concessionaires, the people running kiosks and restaurants who really have been hurt in the last year.
Phil LeBeau, live at O'Hare. Thank you. Andrew Ross Sorkin now, co-anchor of Squawk Box. Andrew, taxpayers bailed out these airlines with billions of dollars during the pandemic. So now demand's way up, but flights are being canceled because they can't get their staff back in there. How is that the airlines were not ready for this surge? I mean, were they not watching the news or listening to people who said we're going to travel the minute we can?
There's two sides to the story, Shep. On one side, when the airlines argued to Washington that they needed bailouts that the taxpayers should pay, they said, look, we're going to be saving jobs, but not just saving jobs. We're going to be ready when the economy and the health situation is safe and better. And we're going to help the economy expand because we're going to have our people in place ready to go. They're not. So clearly there's a problem. The flip side is that had they not been helped, a lot of them may have filed for bankruptcy. They would have still stayed in the air, but they might have had even less people prepared at this moment. So hard to make a call just yet, but clearly they have a lot of questions to answer.
Andrew, 3 months ago, you wrote an article in the New York Times, and in it you questioned whether the airline bailouts were really needed. When looking back, were they?
I think it's actually very hard to say they were, especially now, because if there was a salient argument, it was about being ready when things could come back so they could help the economy lift off even more. And we're clearly in a tough situation. It's much tougher than we should be, given the amount of money the taxpayers paid and the airlines and the airline executives and shareholders benefited from.
Andrew, thank you. The conversation continues tomorrow morning. The FAA Administrator Steve Dixon will be live for a CNBC exclusive. Catch that on Squawk Box. The airtime is 8 o'clock Eastern on CNBC. First in business worldwide. Politics now, and as expected, Republicans have blocked the Senate from even debating a voting rights bill.
The yeas are 50, the nays are 50. The motion is not agreed to.
The For the People Act was doomed to fail, but Senate Democrats put it up for a vote anyway. Not one Republican senator broke ranks. After the vote, the Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer vowed the fight to protect voting rights is just beginning.
This vote, I'm ashamed to say, is further evidence that voter suppression has become part of the official platform of the Republican Party. In the fight for voting rights, this vote was the starting gun, not the finish line.
Well, ahead of today's vote, the top Republican in the Senate, the Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, accused Democrats of, as he put it, trying to tilt every election in America permanently in their favor.
What this is really about is an effort for the federal government to take over the way we conduct elections in this country. It is a solution in search of a problem. And so finally today, we will put an end to it.
So the big looming question, where do Democrats go from here? NBC's Sahil Kapoor on Capitol Hill now for us. Sahil, what about it? Where do they go?
Shep, a major vote in the Senate today. Republicans, of course, unifying to filibuster Democrats' sweeping election overhaul and voting legislation. Now, Democrats insist this is not the end of the road. You heard Senator Schumer there. He said after the vote that Democrats were going to exhaust every option they had to continue fighting for voting rights. Vice President Harris, who was presiding over that vote, you heard her voice there announcing that failure to 50-50, unable to get 60 votes. Take a listen to what she had to say just after that vote.
The bottom line is that the president and I are very clear. We support S1. We support the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, and the fight is not over.
Now, the question is where exactly Democrats go from here. The preferred option for progressives was that they would vote to abolish the filibuster and simply push through the legislation on a majority vote basis. That is not happening. There are several holdouts in the Democratic caucus who support keeping the filibuster, one of whom, Senator Joe Manchin, I spoke to just as he was walking off the Senate chamber. He has not changed his position on the filibuster. Where does that leave Democrats now? They could try to repackage the bill, pull out some smaller components of it. Manchin told me that he was talking to Republicans about a separate piece of legislation, the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, which would restore a portion of the 1965 Voting Rights Act that the Supreme Court gutted several years ago. There is some possibility that they could restore a formula through which states would have to pre-clear their laws. That, too, Shep, is going to be a steep uphill climb in the Senate because most Republican senators I speak to simply say the federal government should not be getting involved in this. They are okay with the restrictive voting laws that states like Georgia and Florida are pursuing. It's a massive difference with Democrats, and it's very difficult to see that Venn diagram overlap with what Democrats want, which is a federal standard. Things like 15 days of early voting guaranteed in every state, automatic voter registration, universal access to mail-in voting. Republicans are simply not interested in this stuff, and as long as the filibuster remains, it's going to be a very difficult uphill climb for Democrats to get any of these through. Shep?
Clearly. Sahil Kapoor, thank you. And just moments ago, the House Speaker Nancy Pelosi announced she will create a new committee to investigate the insurrection at the Capitol. NBC News reports Speaker Pelosi told House Democrats just moments ago that she will create a select committee, as they call it, to study the January 6th attack. The move comes a week after Republicans blocked a bipartisan probe on that. The White House acknowledged a failure today. The United States will likely not hit President Biden's vaccination goal by the 4th of July. Now, what Dr. Fauci says needs to happen to avoid a COVID surge. The crisis facing police departments across our nation. Officers retiring earlier and not enough new recruits to replace them, while a surge of violence sweeps the nation. And after yet another shouting match to beat the band, the school board that voted to scrap the name of every holiday from its calendar. No more Christmas, no more Thanksgiving, no more New Year's. Just made a new decision.
The Podium, an Olympic podcast from NBC, will bring you deep into the stories and events that have defined the Games past and will define the Tokyo Games. But we'll also give you an intimate look into the unseen details that only the athletes themselves can tell.
I'm sitting in these giant inflated boots that come up your butt.
My grandma tends to hoard the medals and the trophies.
That's something that will just automatically get you stopped by airport security is, what's in your bag? Oh, it's a gold medal.
Tune in for weekly episodes wherever you listen to podcasts.
The vaccine now, and the White House admitting it will likely fall short of President Biden's goal to get 70% of adults at least one COVID shot by the 4th of July. And there's new data that shows vaccine hesitancy among younger Americans is a big reason why. The CDC reports 80% of people 65 and older received at least one shot as of last month. That's compared to just 38% for adults between the ages of 18 and 29. The White House says hesitancy among that young group of adults is a real problem and one it's working to address.
Many younger Americans have felt like COVID-19 is not something that impacts them, and they've been less eager to get the shot. With the Delta variant now spreading across the country and infecting younger people worldwide, it's more important than ever that they get vaccinated. We are working with state and local leaders to reach them.
Still, the U.S. is making significant progress in getting COVID under control. Right now, we're averaging a little more than 11,000 new infections a day. For some context, daily cases topped 250,000 back in January. That's according to Johns Hopkins. Dr. Anthony Fauci has signaled cases will need to dip below 10,000 a day to avoid a surge. But there are growing concerns about the highly contagious Delta variant. Dr. Fauci says the strain now accounts for more than 20% of all new cases nationwide. He describes the Delta variant as the greatest threat to ending the pandemic here in the United States. Police officers in Portland, Oregon will no longer pull over drivers for minor traffic infractions that don't pose a public danger. The mayor announced that major change today, saying people of color are stopped disproportionately more.
We can both have a capable public safety response as well as rise to the calls for improved policing in our community.
Police data shows from 2016 to 2019, black people made up about 17% or more of the traffic stops in Portland, despite representing only 6% of the population. They were also asked to consent to a voluntary search at more than double the rate of white people, 8% compared to 3%. The new directive from the mayor there comes as police officers in Portland and in departments across the country tell NBC News that morale is at an all-time low. Here's Gabe Gutierrez.
Night after night after night. The clashes in Portland were relentless, and many police officers felt targeted.
Morale, I think, is at an all-time low now.
The precinct where Officer Krutta Runsuck works is still boarded up more than a year after George Floyd's murder.
We're being held responsible for the actions of an officer that's across the country, and I don't think that's fair.
Since last July, at least 115 Portland officers have left the force, either by resigning or retiring. There are now barely 800 left. Just last week, members of the city's rapid response team resigned from that unit after one officer was charged with excessive force during a protest last year.
We're stereotyped.
Daryl Turner is the police union's executive director, who retired in January.
We're dealing with rioting at a level and a sustained violence that we've never seen before, gun violence in our city like we've never seen before. We're looking at the most catastrophic staffing levels we've ever seen before.
It's a problem that's exploded nationwide. Several cities have faced calls to defund the police. Others have slashed budgets due to COVID. More and more officers say they feel villainized like never before. A survey of about 200 police departments finds that retirements are up 45% and resignations 18% when compared with the previous year.
We've reached a breaking point.
Sergeant Jake Verhalen in Folsom, California says Floyd's death has rippled across even smaller departments like his, where recruiting new officers is getting much harder.
Some of it has to do with pay and benefits, but I think there is a bigger picture, and that being this public discourse, if you will, against the police, and some young people perhaps are asking themselves the question, is that really a career path that I want to go down?
In Richmond, Virginia, Officer Carol Adams is now trying to mend relationships within her community. As a black woman, last year's protest felt even more personal.
I'm standing as a human being, and I'm processing as a human being.
Do you think you can help me with the $1?
I'm going to give you $1 too. You can't separate me. You can't make me one or the other. I'm both.
That duality, even more drastic, as many officers say within months they went from being considered heroes on the front lines to enemies.
It all boils down to these three main concepts of being underfunded, understaffed, and undersupported.
And now uncertainty about their future. For the news, I'm Gabe Gutierrez, Portland, Oregon.
In Atlanta last month, a young woman was driving home when bullets ripped through her car and killed her. Her family says investigators now believe they were stray bullets from a road rage shooting a full mile away. It happened over Memorial Weekend in Doraville, a suburb of Atlanta. Police there are asking for the public's help in finding 25-year-old Carmen Lee's killer. Investigators say they found Lee's body inside her SUV, a gunshot wound to her head. You can see her vehicle came to a stop against the median here. Shortly before they discovered Lee's body, police say a different driver reported somebody shot at his car a mile up the same road. Well, now the New Jersey School Board that is reversing its decision to remove all holiday names from its calendar. Seems a lot of people in town complained a bit. We reported on this story from Randolph, New Jersey, 2 weeks ago. It started when community members spoke up against using Columbus Day on the calendar, saying it glorifies violence and slavery. There was a lot of loud arguing, so the board essentially threw up its arms and voted to remove the name of every holiday and just call them all off days. Well, yesterday, more arguing. In fact, a 5-hour shouting match. And after, the board reversed its own decision. And in doing so added, caving to public pressure sets a dangerous precedent of public threats influencing schools. Again, Randolph, New Jersey. New York City voters headed to the polls today, and they have another hour and a half to finish. For the first time, Democrats are choosing their nominee for mayor with a whole new system. Next, Steve Kornacki at the big board, breaking down ranked choice voting as other cities and states consider using it as well. They survived COVID, but can they survive a crippling shortage of workers? Meet two LGBTQ small business owners pushing to keep things going in a post-pandemic world. About an hour and 38 minutes till the polls close in New York City on a highly contentious primary for mayor. A big reason why the race is piquing national interest is the way New Yorkers are voting. It's a crowded field, 13 Democrats running to be their party's nominee for mayor. Instead of voting for just one candidate like most do, voters in New York can select their top 5 choices and rank them in order of preference. It's called, geniusly, ranked choice voting. This is what the New York City ballot looks like today. Ranked choice voting has been gaining traction nationally. Alaska plans to start using the very same system just next year. NBC's Steve Kornacki breaking down exactly how this system works. Hi, Steve.
Hey, Shep. Well, yeah, happy ranked choice primary day to you. Look, New York City, biggest city in the country. This is the biggest city or state. It's the biggest jurisdiction anywhere where this has been tried. So how does ranked choice voting work here in this mayoral primary? You showed it. The ballot will look something like this. If you're a voter in this Democratic primary, you see the list of candidates and you get to mark down who your first choice is, your second choice, your third choice, your fourth choice, and your fifth choice. Now, what will election administrators then do with that? How do they take that and determine a winner? Here's how it'll work. What we're going to use here is you're just looking at, this is the most recent WNBC poll. These aren't actual election results, but just to give you a sense of it, this is the most recent poll here of the mayoral race. And the way ranked choice voting works is this. They take everybody's first choice, whoever people marked off as their first choice on the ballot, they count them all up, and then whoever finishes last, when they count all those up, so in this poll it would be Foldenauer, whoever finishes last would then be eliminated. And then they take the voters who voted for that candidate and they look at their ballots. Who was their second choice? And, if a voter picked Foldenauer got eliminated, and the second choice was Wiley, then Wiley gets the vote. If the second choice was Garcia gets the vote, and so on. They reallocate the votes from the candidate that's eliminated. Then they run the numbers again, and same thing. Whoever's in last place, let's say in the next round, Wright was in last place, gets eliminated. They look at the voters, they look at the next choice on the ballot, and they reallocate. And they're going to do this over and over. They're going to do, ultimately, Shep, 12 rounds of this until it gets down to 2 candidates, a one-on-one. They'll run the numbers once more, and whoever emerges from that will win the Democratic primary for mayor of New York. And to win the Democratic primary in overwhelmingly Democratic New York very likely means that will be the next mayor of the nation's largest city. By the way, don't expect that answer tonight on who that is. The polls close at 9. The result, probably not till mid-July.
A lot of reasons to do this, Steve. One of them is to eliminate the runoff, which normally we would have in just a few days, and that's expensive.
Exactly. And like I said, mid-July for the result on this. If you had a normal runoff, you would probably be waiting until mid-July for that as well. So it doesn't save any time, that's for sure.
True that. And Republicans will have time to mount their strategy. Steve Kornacki, thank you.
You got it.
A voting rights bus tour stopped in Atlanta yesterday. Hundreds of activists on board say they are challenging racial segregation in America and emulating what the Freedom Riders did through the South 60 years ago. The current campaign's called Black Voters Matter. It began in New Orleans, traveled up to Jackson and on to Birmingham, and it'll make other stops in the South before arriving in D.C. on Saturday. The riders say they're calling on lawmakers to pass the For the People Voting Rights Bill. A similar one died in the Senate when Republicans voted unanimously to block debate. The Free Britney movement getting some star power from Britney Spears herself. The singer set to make a rare address to a court about her conservatorship, as a new report reveals details about how long she's been fighting for her freedom. Royal Caribbean's test cruise in the books. But was it enough to greenlight bringing passengers back on board? And a shocking end to a high school basketball game. Not on the scoreboard, but among the fans. That's next, as we approach the bottom of the hour and the top of the news from CNBC. Smooth sailing for Royal Caribbean. The company's cruise ship returned to South Florida this morning after a 2-day simulated cruise. The purpose was to test the cruise line's health and safety measures in accordance with CDC rules. More than 600 employees volunteered to make the test run, waving all along, all of them fully vaccinated.
I think it just gave me chills because you feel like the world got smaller during the pandemic. And so I feel like this really felt like we're really accessing this freedom again to travel and to experience and just enjoy life.
We feel really good about our protocols, and all the conversations I had from my folks on board, things have gone exceptionally well.
Well, the test trip lifted hopes for a cruise industry comeback. Freedom of the Seas, the first ship to leave a U.S. port with passengers since the pandemic began, it's scheduled to set sail again next week with paying guests on board. 1970s inflation staying in the past, and that's what's topping CNBC on the money. The Fed Chair Jerome Powell telling a House panel today it's very, very unlikely that the U.S. will see 1970s-style inflation. The central bank leader attributing most of the recent inflation surge to factors tied to the economy reopening. Factors like airline tickets, hotel prices, and surging consumer demand. He says those should resolve themselves, as he put it, in the coming months. Carl Nassib became the first active NFL player to come out as gay just yesterday. And since then, his is the top-selling jersey in all the league on the NFL gear site Fanatics. That's from ESPN's Adam Schefter. In coming out, the Vegas Raiders 94 donated $100,000 to the Trevor Project. Today, the NFL matched his donation. The Trevor Project offers crisis intervention and suicide prevention services to LGBTQ people under the age of 25. And 20 years ago today, The Fast and the Furious roared into theaters and spawned a generation of sequels. F9 hit theaters Friday from our parent company. But this iconic 1994 Toyota Supra that Paul Walker drove in the first movie just sold at auction for $550,000. The Supra decked out with all of its original aftermarket parts from the film. On Wall Street, the Dow up 69, S&P up 22, the Nasdaq up 112. I'm Shepard Smith on CNBC. It's the bottom of the hour. Time for the top of the news.
It could be the biggest change to antitrust law in generations. How the push by Democrats to rein in big tech could change the way you do almost everything online. Britney Spears set for a rare court appearance tomorrow as new details emerge about the pop star's long struggle for control of her own life. And a shameful act of racism on a high school basketball court.
Happened in the San Diego suburb of Coronado. A high school basketball championship game between the majority white school and Orange Glen High, a predominantly Latino school in nearby Escondido. Take a look at this. The end of the game, Orange Glen High narrowly won, but then people from the home team crowd, Coronado, began throwing tortillas.
Jesse! What the heck? Freaking tortillas?
Are you kidding me?
Tortillas?
What a racist...
Now, communities in California are demanding someone be held accountable. CNBC's Valerie Castro is here now with the rest of the story. Hi, Valerie.
Hi, Shep. Students and parents at Orange Glen, that's the school of the losing team, say they are shocked and saddened by the incident and are demanding real action be taken on the part of the California Interscholastic Federation. One Orange Glen player says this is the first blatantly racist incident he's experienced.
I think it's sad that their crowd's idea was a joke is throwing tortillas at a Hispanic school. I was told that they were saying, get out of here because they're going to start throwing sombreros and just other racist remarks.
If sportsmanship is that important to CIF, then they ought to be holding people accountable right now for their actions.
The San Diego chapter of CIF issued a statement saying in part that it prohibits discrimination or any acts that are disrespectful or demeaning towards a member school, student, athlete, or school community. The organization has not announced any sanctions against the Coronado team. The Coronado Unified School District condemned the incident and issued an apology to the Orange Glen High School athletes in its own statement. That school board has called for an emergency special meeting to take place later this evening. Numerous social justice groups rallied together outside Coronado High School today, vocal about their outrage and demands for immediate action, even calling this a hate crime.
It was pure and blatant racism and hate. We want firings. We want Coronado High School to have to forfeit that game. Coronado High School forfeits that game. They forfeit that game. And I guarantee you it will never happen again.
Shep, the school board that oversees Orange Glen High School is also having a meeting tonight to discuss action on that side. They've called the incident ugly and unacceptable racist behavior. At the heart of all of this, police say it was an adult who brought the tortillas to the game. And Shep, so far that man has not been publicly identified.
Lots of talk yet to come on that one. Valerie, thanks so much. It's Pride Month, and LGBTQ small business owners, like so many others, say they're having a hard time hiring workers. That's from a new survey CNBC and Acorns conducted with the National Lesbian Gay Chamber of Commerce. 42% of those business owners say it's because many employees are not interested in returning to work due to existing unemployment benefits, while 35% say their employees found different jobs. We focus on two women whose small businesses survived COVID and more. Here's CNBC's Kate Rogers.
About 13 years ago, I transitioned.
Micaela Mendelson is CEO of Pollo West Corp., one of the largest franchisees of El Pollo Loco.
It was not an easy thing. I had 3 children that were growing up, and, it was confusing for them and for my spouse. And at that time, I had 15 restaurants and 500 employees.
Mendelson took her struggle and helped others dealing with their own gender identity issues.
It was wonderful for the employees who, most of them came to us with very low self-esteem, just struggling to get through day to day, working in their true gender identity. We saw miracles happen in their lives.
In Cleveland, Shantae Thompson is president of Brigadier Construction Services. She and her wife are parents of 6.
I am proud to be an LGBTQ owner because there aren't very many of us, especially I don't know of any other construction company, man or woman owned, who is LGBT. How much are you going to do here?
Thompson is also a disabled veteran. But last year, COVID was her biggest challenge as a small business owner.
All of our jobs, except for one, was shut down.
Business is back, but for many companies, finding workers is hard.
There was already an existing challenge pre-COVID with manpower and finding folks who would, come to work every day and put their best foot forward.
It's more of a job market for employees than it is for employers right now.
Mendelson started Trans Can Work in 2016, a nonprofit that works with corporations to help create a culture supportive of transgender and non-binary employees.
We found that you give our community a chance to be on a level playing field. You're going to get loyal, strong employees.
In our recent CNBC and Acorn survey with the National Lesbian Gay Chamber of Commerce, more than 3/4 of LGBTQ plus small business owners say they are expecting a full recovery from the pandemic in 2022, which is great news. Comcast Ventures and NBC Universal are investors in Acorns. Shep?
Kate Rogers, thank you. Who needs coffee bars and ping pong tables at work when you can learn to tango in Argentina or swim with the dolphins in Mexico? The tech startup's going all out and all around the world for a little team bonding. And boy band lovers rejoice. The collaboration many fans never saw coming, but ain't no lie, secretly wanted. Troubles for the Great Barrier Reef and the United Kingdom COVID situation keeps getting worse as we go round the world on CNBC. Cases and hospitalizations are rising across the UK. Today, their government reported the highest number of new infections in 4 months. Hospitalizations are up too, 21% from just last week, the highest since late April. The National Health Service says the Delta variant is the culprit. Restrictions across the UK are still in place, scheduled to be lifted July 19th. Australia, a new report from the UN indicates the Great Barrier Reef should be put on a list of World Heritage Sites that are in danger because of damage. The world body put key targets in place for improving water quality, but the report shows they haven't been met. Australian leaders are fighting back and hard, saying they'll challenge the report. The environmental minister says politics are in play here. Losing the World Heritage Site status would cost Australia millions in tourist dollars. Ukraine, a young couple decided maybe handcuffs would help their relationship. They'd been breaking up and making up again and again, so on Valentine's Day, they handcuffed themselves together, hoping that might turn the tide. They did everything as one, from showers to smoke breaks. Turns out more togetherness was not the ticket to love. They say they're selling the handcuffs at auction online with the newfound understanding that relationship is kaput. Serbia. Happy birthday to the world's oldest captive alligator. Muya just turned 85 at the zoo in Belgrade. Most gators don't live past 40. Muya's keepers say he survived 2 bombings during World War II and another during NATO strikes back in '99. Today, the elderly reptile is a big TikTok star with more than 100,000 views on one video. Muya the Belgrade gator, part of our trip around the world on CNBC. Well, as workers slowly begin turning to offices, some companies in the tech world are taking a different path. Facebook, Twitter, Slack, Microsoft, all letting most employees continue to work from home. But it's not just the giant companies. Startups, too, choosing to keep workforces remote. But they're making up for it with extravagant team bonding trips. And we're not talking happy hour, talking paddleboarding and surfing lessons in other countries. Here's CNBC's Deirdre Bosa.
Forget free snacks, beer on tap, and on-premise coffee roasters. The new tech perks, paddleboarding in Panama.
We took surfing lessons, we cooked, we went paddleboarding, we had long walks on the beach together, and we did a lot of our quarterly planning.
And Camp Thumbtack.
So activities will be everything from team building, right? So building a boat out of cardboard and trying to get across a little lake, to friendly competition, trivia, all sorts of camp games.
As COVID numbers decline and the economy reopens, some tech companies are choosing to keep their workforces remote and getting employees together a few times a year for elaborate company trips. Call it the new offsite. Enterprise software company Office Together was created during the pandemic in response to knowledge workers who wanted more flexibility. CEO and founder Amy Yin says her own workforce is distributed and they are coming together for offsites 3 times a year.
We can't have these water cooler moments on a day-to-day basis anymore. And so we're creating a lot of intentionality around bringing folks together so that we can have fun and be creative.
Local services marketplace Thumbtack has 800 employees. It's moving to a hybrid work model and planning an annual Camp Thumbtack event.
The purpose of this is not to do project work. It's not to sort of write a document or work on a project. It's to build community, to build cohesion.
But while tech is mostly embracing a remote or hybrid model, Wall Street bankers like JP Morgan CEO Jamie Dimon are fed up with Zoom calls and remote work.
We want people back at work.
Yin says companies that don't adopt a flexible model could lose the war for talent.
A recent McKinsey study came out showing that a quarter of employees are willing to leave their jobs if their companies are forcing them to go back into the office full time. And so a lot's at stake because for most companies, their most valuable asset is their people.
Startups, though, may have to thread a delicate balance with new offsites. WeWork infamously held an annual summer camp for employees that, as the company grew, turned into debaucherous parties that alienated some of its workforce and was held up as a corporate governance issue that derailed its IPO in 2019. Zappacosta and Yin are confident they can find the right balance.
It's all about living our values.
The main goal of an offsite is bonding.
And maybe learn to surf along the way. Now, Shep, since these are work offsites after all, though perhaps more fun than your standard offsite, companies, they are covering all of the costs for their employees. Amy Yin told us that she's redirecting budget that would have been spent on physical office space, while Marco Zappacosta of Thumbtack says that they're moving around costs, but that's not the primary motivation. He sees these offsites as a way of becoming a better, more responsive, more equitable organization. Back over to you.
Deirdre, thank you. Congress is taking aim at the size of the tech industry, and big changes could be around the corner. Democrats in the House recently unveiled a bipartisan package of 5 bills. If passed, they would allow the Justice Department and the FTC to label companies of a certain size covered online platforms. That would trigger new restrictions on them. To qualify, a company has to serve at least 50 million U.S. viewers, or users, I should say, or 100,000 U.S. businesses a month. And its parent company must have a market value of at least $600 billion. The bills don't mention Silicon Valley giants by name, but the size of the companies targeted puts these in the crosshairs: Apple, Amazon, Facebook, Google, and Microsoft. Politico's Leah Nyland now. Leah wrote an article titled, "Dems are going after big tech. It'll affect almost everything you do online." Leah, thank you. What specifically could change in our everyday lives if this legislation passes?
Well, these bills are intended to open up competition in the online sphere. So the companies would have to build tools that would make it really easy for you to switch platforms. So if you stop liking Facebook, you might be able to move all of your information and photos and all your friends over to a new platform.
The fact that they don't mention names, I mean, it's sort of an aside. I mean, there's so few that qualify. And I wonder if those big tech companies are fighting back.
Oh, they definitely are. There's been a lot of lobbying over the past 2 weeks against these bills. All of the tech companies now have, except for Microsoft. Microsoft says it's not quite sure it has a problem with it, but it doesn't think it necessarily applies to it. The other companies are not big fans. They've been lobbying against it along with a lot of their trade groups.
You know, Congress doesn't seem to be able to agree on much of anything these days. Do you have a sense for how likely it is that these bills might pass?
It's interesting because these bills have a lot of support from both sides of the aisle. There are a number of people on the Republican side who have concerns about big tech and actually do support these bills. There are also a lot of progressive Democrats that support this. So you have a sort of unlikely coalition of sort of Trump Republicans and progressive Democrats coming together, and that could actually pass these bills.
Yet pressure from both sides often causes movement in the middle, you know?
That's definitely true. Some of the more moderate folks are the ones who have concerns about these bills.
So if I go to Facebook or I go to Amazon, something is going to be different as a result of these? For me as a user?
One thing that they are trying to get rid of is something called self-preferencing. You know how like whenever you search on Amazon, the thing that comes up is Amazon's own product?
Sure.
Well, they don't want that to be happening anymore. They want the best product to be the one there. So you might no longer see Amazon Basics at the top of your search. When you do a Google search, you might not necessarily see YouTube or Google Maps or a lot of Google products showing up right at the top.
That would open things up. Hey, thanks a lot, Leah. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Much like life on Earth, day-to-day space activities can leave people a little, well, stinky. Enter NASA, the galactic problem solver, and a new partnership for the spin cycle. When the world shut down, one man in Wisconsin stepped out with his trumpet to bring music to a city that had been silenced. His story gets the Boyd Hooper treatment. Next. While the super billionaires battle over which of them will become the first to make it to space, baby squid beat them to it. The baby Hawaiian bobtail squid, to be specific, blasted off earlier this month to the International Space Station. The mission, essentially, float around. Researchers at the University of Hawaii are studying how spaceflight affects the marine animals. They say their system is similar to ours, and this research should help keep humans healthy. As people spend more time in space, our immune systems stop working properly. Researchers say they hope the squid will help find a way to fix that. Their return trip scheduled for next month. Another problem NASA's tackling now, dirty laundry. Consider this. You're an astronaut who just completed a 6-hour spacewalk to fix some solar panels. That's after a 2-hour high-intensity workout to fight effects of weightlessness. All you really want to do is shed those sweaty clothes and put on a clean pair of skivvies. But what do you do when you're orbiting the Earth at 17,000 miles per hour and the closest washing machine is like 250 miles down there? The answer is wear the clothes until you can't stand the stench and then toss them. Soon, NASA may have a better solution. It's teaming up with Procter & Gamble to create the first laundry detergent designed for space. The company announcing today it's sending Tide and stain removal experiments to the space station. They even have their own patch. The first samples expected to arrive at the space station next year. Really can't happen soon enough. Astronauts can go through 160 pounds of clothing in a single year. Britney Spears is set to address a court tomorrow to speak directly about her conservatorship. This comes as a new report suggests she's been pushing for years to end her father's control over her life and finances. The New York Times now reports court documents show the pop star said her dad, Jamie Spears, had oppressive control over everything from who she dated to the color of her cabinets. The Times also reports 5 years ago, she told the court investigator that she wanted the conservatorship to end as soon as possible. We've not heard that before. In fact, just last year, a judge ruled against removing the father as her conservator. Publicly, Britney's been mostly silent on this matter, and most everything else, really. Her fans, on the other hand, started a movement, the Free Britney movement. The conservatorship started back in 2008 after doctors placed Britney on 2 separate psychiatric holds. That was supposed to be temporary. But Jamie Spears, the father, has previously said he believes his daughter still needs the conservatorship to protect her from exploitation. He says she can petition to end it whenever she wants. Well, just days ago, Britney Spears took to Insta to answer some of her followers' questions and said she had no idea whether she'll ever take the stage again. She says she's in a transition in her life and enjoying herself. Well, when concerts all but stopped last spring, one musician from Wisconsin wasn't a big fan of the sound of silence. So he grabbed his trumpet and hit the road all over town. Local coverage now from NBC affiliate KARE 11 and their reporter, Boyd Hoopert.
Roberts, Wisconsin has many familiar signs of a small northern town, but also a one-of-a-kind sound. Pete Close didn't set out to be the maestro of the feed mill till COVID shut down the 5 community bands in which he played. And Pete felt the need to get his brass back in gear.
He'll pull over on the side of a street and just start playing music.
So this is the first page.
Pages documenting Pete's 113 COVID concerts.
Ash and Vine, which is the top of the hill I played on May 20th.
Pete prefers the high ground, where his sound can waft across the town. But everyone in Roberts can tell you, Pete's been on the high road for years.
Superheroes are over here.
We first met up with Pete volunteering at the library, after he'd volunteered that morning at the food shelf, after he'd volunteered that same morning watering flowers at the cemetery.
So this is Pete's to-do list.
Need a bingo caller or an octopus hung? Pete's the man for the job.
It makes me happy to do things for other people.
He doesn't exactly live at the library, but close.
On his birthday, he hands out, I don't even know how many dozen cupcakes. Just spreads joy.
An ethic instilled in Pete and his 5 brothers by their parents. Pete still remembers his dad rousting his boys from the house the day after the town festival to pick up the trash others left behind.
And I was like, why do we have to clean it up? He said, it's our town.
Still Pete's town. Often during the school year, Pete played for elementary students boarding their buses.
And it has a little trumpet there.
Then the students let him know how they felt. Pete also has a pretty good notion of how his dad would feel.
Yep, he would definitely approve.
What a wonderful world if every town, like Roberts, had a Pete. For the news, I'm Boyd Hooper. Roberts, Wisconsin.
Love that. Well, Backstreet's back, and they're bringing NSYNC along with them. At long last, the late 90s battle of the boy bands put to rest. No more Team Backstreet Boys or Team NSYNC, because today we say, why not both? A.J. McClain and Nick Carter of the Backstreet Boys teaming up with Joe Fatone and Lance Bass of NSYNC to form the ultimate boy band, BackSync. The newly formed group performed Friday in L.A. at a Pride event. But if you missed it, don't hang up your Uggs and scrunchies just yet. Word today from Lance Bass, this could become an annual gig. 75 seconds on a race to the finish. Speaker Nancy Pelosi's office just announced that she plans to announce this week whether she will create a select committee to investigate the January 6th insurrection. That contradicts NBC's reporting and ours earlier this hour. The speaker says her preference is a bipartisan commission, but that Republicans are blocking it. The number of unruly passengers on flights is soaring, according to new FAA data. The feds are seeking more than $500,000 in fines against dozens of flyers. The list of offenses ranges from refusing to wear masks to attacking flight attendants. Tomorrow, President Biden is set to lay out his plan to combat the surge of violent crime and shootings across the nation. And now you know the news. Of this Tuesday, June the 22nd, 2021, the conversation on what's happening in the skies continues first thing in the morning on Squawk Box, the main man in charge to discuss what we're going to do as a traveling public early in the morning, first in business worldwide. Of course, Shark Tank is next, and we'll see you back here tomorrow night. You've been listening to the CNBC podcast, The News with Shepard Smith. You can always catch us live weekdays at 7 p.m. Eastern, only on CNBC.